I'm going to hand it over to Frank Ciccerella, who again is going to talk to us about programs, policies, and procedures and why they matter. Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Nerv. Good morning, everyone.
Welcome everyone to TTA's 6-part webinar series called Mastering Business Essentials. Today we've got part 5 with Frank Ciccerella, a longtime industry expert who's going to talk to us about programs, policies, and procedures and why they matter. Now, before getting into that, I want to say that if you are not a TTA member, here's 4 really good reasons as to why you should join. Number 1, educational resources and industry insights. You get to stay ahead of the curve with access to webinars, seminars, training sessions, newsletters, reports, and sessions like the one that you're about to see with Frank Ciccerella today. Number 2, advocacy and representation. The things that you care about, you get to be part of TTA's direct channels with the government to advocate for those things. Number 3, networking events. You get to connect with industry leaders and experts and your fellow members at conferences like the TTA Mobilize Conference, which is in Vegas this year. Who doesn't want to do that? And number 4, member discounts. You get discounts on everything I just said. And as a special bonus, TTA is actually running a promotion right now. So between today and September 15th, if you're a transport operator who joins TTA, you get to pay half prices for the rest of 2025. And another promotion, if you operate with less than 5 vehicles, you only pay $50 for an annual membership. Take advantage of that stuff. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Frank Ciccerella, who again is going to talk to us about programs, policies, and procedures and why they matter. Frank, over to you.
Thank you, Nerv. Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started. I'm going to share my screen here, and we'll just put this in place. So, understanding the importance of programs, policy, and procedures is critical to the norms of how you operate your business. And we're going to talk a little bit about what they are and what does the norms mean when we talk about our operations and what we have to do to run our companies. So what are norms and what do norms have to do with my company? You know, public transportation companies must have a foundational approach to how they operate and how their employees are expected to behave. And that's very important for a lot of reasons, having to do with not only how they behave, for example, with greeting a customer and securing a wheelchair, but also to protect your company from litigation. And we'll talk about that in another slide a little bit later. But it's how our employees are expected to behave. Remember, as owners, you're not out driving the vehicles every day. So it's the drivers who put their first foot forward for us as operators, and we need to know how they're going to behave. And what happens is the norms or the policies, procedures, and programs actually help define how they do that. The foundational approach utilizes the norms of operation. The norms of operation become the reasonable and proper standards, programs, policies, and procedures for behavior or what is expected of employees in a given certain context. So in other words, if your driver goes to pick up someone at a adult daycare center, what do you expect them to do when they approach the desk or the nurses that may be there, or approaching your clients, your passengers? What's expected of them? What's expected of them when they go to load a wheelchair? So what we're doing with these norms of operation and the programs, policies, and procedures is we're creating a safety culture that your company can adapt, and it's the foundational approach to how we do that. Very important stuff here. So what are the norms and what do norms have to do with my company? Well, the success and sustainability of any organization, especially true for NEMT, paratransit, transportation companies, that will form the fundamental elements to provide structure, consistency, and accountability for your operation. Everybody likes structure, right? I've walked into enough operations over my career where you walk in and it's like, a fire going on. Everybody's trying to do something, throwing little buckets of water to control things. Whereas, you know, having these programs, policies, and procedures actually provide a structure. They provide consistency in how you're going to operate and accountability to making sure that your drivers and your staff behave correctly. Having programs, policies, and procedures, the norms will provide protection against litigation concerns. Um, what does that mean? Well, I do a lot of work for attorneys, uh, especially in the plaintiff arena, where someone is hurt on the bus or the vehicle. It could be a taxi, it could be paratransit, could be an NEMT vehicle. One of the first things that I look at when we were talking litigation with the attorneys is what was a company policy? For example, we'll talk about wheelchair. What is the company policy on securing the wheelchair? How was the driver trained? And did he do what he was told to do? So we have a program, we have a policy, and we have a procedure that it's expected that the driver will follow. And when they don't follow that and someone gets hurt, that's where the litigation comes in. And typically in the world today, that is the Achilles heel of most lawsuits that are going on is what was the driver trained to do and what did they do or didn't do that caused the injury or in worst case scenarios a fatality. So what are the areas that we want to talk about in this norms process? Programs, policies, and procedures will help establish the norms in the following areas. We're going to look at each one of these. So the first one is regulatory compliance, operational efficiency, employee accountability and consistency, risk management and safety, workplace culture and employee satisfaction, and customer satisfaction and reputation management. And you think about those topics in our world, NEMT and the taxi, we need to have good control over these things. And we want to know in each one of these areas as we move forward, we're going to talk about what are the written programs, policies, and procedures that we would have to have in your operation to be compliant or have that foundational aspect of your operation work well for you. So when we talk about regulatory compliance, programs, policies, and procedures help businesses comply with industry regulations and legal requirements, reducing the risk of violations, fines, or lawsuits. Think of OSHA, EPA, vehicle registrations, etc. And part of that, if you dig a little deeper, for example, in OSHA, we're talking about how we report and how we record. OSHA can come to your place of business, for example, show their credentials, and ask to see your 300 log of injuries, see that you've been reporting injuries, and they can review your operation. So by having a program policy procedure, for example, in OSHA review would be housekeeping in your facility. How do you do it? Another area that would fall into this category is health for your employees. How would you have, for example, a clean restroom with warm water and soap to wash their hands? These are all parts of programs, policies, and procedures that in the world of OSHA you would need to have that um, down pat in how you work those processes. Same thing if you think about training for fraud, waste, and abuse that we got to do, substance abuse training and reporting. We have to do drug testing the right way. If you're a DOT operation, there's rules that you have to follow in the Part 40 and Part 655 of the Federal Transit Administration Safety Program for Drug and Substance Abuse. You have reporting responsibilities, but beyond the DOT side, if you operate as a non-DOT entity, how do you want to protect the people that you have working for you in drivers? Because when we talk about programs, policies, procedures, and we talk about, for example, if we had a accident that occurred, God forbid somebody was injured severely or you had a fatality occur, and it was due to a drug problem of your driver, one of the first things the plaintiff is going to ask is or talk about is the duty of care. Did you not think it was wise to have a substance abuse program that protects your passengers just like every other company does around the country? So these are things that you got to think about when we talk about regulatory compliance. And then another thing to think about in this arena is if you have contracts, what are your requirements to stay compliant with your contracts? These all fall under this area of what programs do I need? What policies do I need? What procedures do I need to stay in compliance? There's a lot to review there when you think in this category. Operational efficiency was the next topic we talked about. Um, and really, it means a clear guideline to streamline decision making, minimize confusion, and enhance productivity by standardizing workflow and processes. So, in other words, if we think of on time performance, DVIR reporting and daily vehicle inspection process, PM programs, booking trips, developing check in time checks, communication etiquette, daily operational logs, weekly management meetings. These are all part of operational efficiency. And I'll focus on one here that's really important, the daily vehicle inspection process. When your driver goes out to take their vehicle, we want them to do a DVI process. And why? Well, we check for all the functioning parts of the vehicle, but also the safety equipment that's on the vehicle. And they got to write it up. They'll check it off on the list and make sure it's there. But beyond that, what happens if they report something that's not working? What is your program, your policy, and your procedure to get that vehicle repaired? That's number one. Number two, how do we notify maintenance or your provider for maintenance that this is the issue? And then thirdly, how does the driver know that it's been fixed the next day when they go to take that vehicle out? So there's a very good element of a foundational practice that makes operational efficiency in this area very important, that it flows nice and easy. So you don't have problems with vehicles that are going out on the road that haven't been repaired, or the driver doesn't know if they were repaired. So that then flows to what kind of PM program do you have written for your vehicles that has a program, a policy, and a procedure? For example, some cases, a preventative maintenance program will have it written that all your vehicles go through an A inspection every 5,000 miles and a B inspection maybe every 7,500 miles. So, are you following that program, that policy, and the procedure to make sure your vehicle stays safe? Then, on top of it, it gets tied to the DVI reporting. So, operational efficiency is very, very important when we run our business and how we run it, and to have that foundation squared away to help your drivers and your staff understand it. Okay. Employee accountability and consistency. Can't stress enough that the norms create a framework for expected behavior and performance, ensuring fairness and consistency in management decisions. So, what might be a management decision you could ask yourself? Uh, let's talk about cell phones for a minute. If we have a cell phone program, a policy to procedure, for example, that no one's to use their cell phone for personal use while they're driving, but you find out that through your video cameras or whatever surveillance you have, the driver is using their cell phone. So now, how do you ensure consistency and what is the expected behavior of that driver? So when you find somebody that's violating your program, your policy procedure, especially in a cell phone area where it could lead to a safety issue or cause an accident, that's when you have to bring the driver in and deal with some kind of management decision for disciplinary issue. So you can fall back on, in this situation, how is it written that you have a framework for what their expected behavior is? And did they violate it? It also bodes well, if you're catching this, but if you have nothing there and they go out and have an accident while they're on the cell phone, I can tell you that one of the areas we'll look at is, did the company have a policy for this and was the driver trained on it? And it opens up a can of worms for you if you're trying to defend this, if you don't have this type of policy in place. So, what do you use to base your decisions? Is it a gut reaction or do you have a program policy procedure that's written? That's the big thing. It's not the easiest thing to do, but do you have a policy, a program that's written down on paper that you train to, that's part of your operation, is part of your foundational policies? Termination of an employee for poor performance based on policy violations is a way to keep your operation uh, uh, in fairness, providing consistency to the other drivers that are there, and they understand what the expected behavior is while they're driving for you. So again, I'm going to fall back on my experience and work with attorneys. Is really important that you have something like this, because this falls into this Achilles heel thing again that I was talking about. What are the behaviors and the performance of that driver? What do you use to base your decisions? So, for example, some of you may have lytics cameras in your vehicle. And lytics, if you don't have, gives you drivers who commit bad behaviors while they're out on the road. It lets you see the video. So having the cameras is great, but if you don't have a policy and a program that surrounds the cameras, what do you do with a driver that's consistently violating a speeding policy or consistently is driving through red lights or not stopping properly? How do you correct the behavior? And that's what the policies give you, is that platform for you to use to correct the bad behavior, or if need be, terminate the employee from working for you to get rid of the chance that they'll continue. Again, in that situation, attorneys look at those things and want to know, is the company following their own policies and procedures? Are they getting rid of the bad apples? Are they disciplining the bad apples? That's what we're looking for in this situation. Excuse me. In risk management and safety, the programs, policies, and procedures, the norms, help mitigate risk by establishing best practices for workplace safety, crisis response, and compliance with health and safety standards. So one of the questions we always ask folks who are in the business, what's the meaning of safety? Do we understand what that means? And the meaning of safety, 3 words, is the freedom from risk. And then the next question, what is risk? Risk is the possibility of injury or damage to property. So the question becomes, how do I eliminate risk? But we have to understand it, that risk is broken down into 2 categories. One is unsafe conditions. So 1% of all accidents fall into that category of an unsafe condition. So, for example, a driver goes out and doesn't, I'm sorry, the bus breaks down on the side of the road, and a client that you're carrying has an emergency medical. It's an incident, it falls into that condition that the bus wasn't prepared or safe to go out. Unsafe behaviors account for 99% of the accidents and incidents are caused by conscious and deliberate unsafe behaviors. Now think about that for a minute. Drivers who are out on the road, one of the problems that we have typically in all transportation areas is problems at intersections. How do I stop at an intersection? Okay, there's usually a stop line or a sidewalk, a stop sign. And if drivers are not trained properly and have a program, a policy, and a procedure to go through the intersection or go through the intersection the right way, then they're causing this problem of an unsafe behavior at the intersection. And we have to change that process by having it written, for example, how do I go through the intersection? So we approach the intersection, we reduce our speed, we cover our brake, we get to the intersection, we stop before the stop line or the stop sign or the sidewalk. We look left, right, left, straight. Before we proceed through, we wait a couple of seconds to make sure if there's a car next to us, they go through first. We make sure the intersection is clear. And then we also, in my company, when we train this, we train to count corners. We understand how the driver's looking. We get their vision, their view of what's on each corner of the intersection. But we train that. So if we don't do that, or if we just blatantly say, yeah, stop at the stop sign and then go through it, the drivers develop these bad habits and they roll through stop signs, or they don't look left, right, and left, and they get hit by an oncoming car, or they hit a pedestrian or kill a pedestrian, worst case scenario, because they're not doing what they're supposed to be. Currently, I'm handling a case right now where a transit bus struck a 10-year-old child who ran out in front of him. He was speeding in a school zone, and he said he saw the child. You could see the child in their video camera. When he asked, were you trained on how to go through the intersection by slowing down? He said, yes. Did you understand how to get attention of the child, blow your horn, flash your lights? He said, yes. And he actually added to that and said, and the other thing is, if I couldn't, I'd stop my vehicle. But in this case, he just ignored all of that and continued on and struck the child. So these unsafe behaviors can be corrected by having programs, policies, and procedures in place, but it helps reduce or eliminate the risk that is inherent when we drive our vehicles on in our communities. We have to create the programs that we use to train for. If you don't have a structured training program, you need to have one that helps eliminate this risk by showing or teaching what these programs, policies, and procedures are, or what their expected behavior is when they're out there driving. Workplace culture and employee satisfaction. The norms are well structured to foster a positive work environment by defining ethical standards, diversity initiatives, and personal development opportunities. We think of, for example, how do we prevent workplace harassment? Substance abuse prevention programs, uniform programs, clean and sanitary vehicles, hiring criteria. The list goes really on to help that workplace culture and employee satisfaction reach a pinnacle that when drivers go out on the road, we know that they're representing our companies. They are the face of the company. So how do they do the work? How are they going through the process? So when we say, for example, substance abuse prevention, do they know, your drivers, that you're a drug-free workplace? Is it posted anywhere for people when they walk in to see it? Um, what does the drug and alcohol program look like? Are you doing a DOT or a non-DOT program? And is everybody part of it? What about preventing workplace harassment? Do we have a policy for that? Do we understand reporting harassment that takes place so your employees have a outlet to go to if they feel harassed? Today, that is one of the bigger things that goes on today in court cases. And I'll tell you, the companies that don't have a harassment policy or a reporting process, they end up with some big fines or litigation against them. So you got to think about all these different things. Clean and sanitary vehicles. How often are your vehicles clean? But it's not just the outside, but how do we clean the inside of the vehicle? So when people get in, the type of folks that we carry, they may have issues. We need to make sure the vehicle is clean for the next person. How do we hire? Are we doing the background checks properly? Are we getting physicals, drug screens, um, reference checks? If it's a DOT operation, are you getting the DOT reference checks? All those things come into play to set your culture up. But how do you have your programs, your policy, and your procedures to do those things? It all has to be spelled out so you have it. Customer satisfaction, reputation management. Again, part of our business when we think about it is how do people know to come to you? What makes them want to come to you? Um, our communities that we serve sometimes are very small, meaning the folks talk to one another, and it's really important to have these things in place. The programs, policies, and procedures about the norms will ensure high quality service delivery, enhancing customer trust and brand recognition. For example, if your driver is going to pick up someone in a mobility device, and the steps that we teach, for example, is how to approach the customer, how to talk to the customer, showing ID, confirming where they're going, securing the mobility device properly, talking to the customer about how they feel on the securement piece, getting to the location where they're going, telling them that, hey, we're at your drop off point. Hang on, I'll be there to unhook your wheelchair, your mobility device, so I can help you down. And then how does the driver handle the wheelchair or the mobility device, their management? And it's ensuring that high quality in service delivery. We want the customer to trust your driver. If you've been around this business long enough, you'll always hear about, oh my God, that guy's terrible. He's doing this wrong and that wrong. And, you know, uh, I wouldn't ride with them for love nor money, and you always hear about that. But how do you make sure that your drivers don't do it? It's all about gaining the customer's trust, your brand recognition. So it's important that you establish that through these programs, policies, and procedures. Think of the frontline employees understanding the expectations of the service being provided, being courteous, reliable, and knowledgeable. So, in other words, if you have a contract that outlines very specific things that they want done, do your drivers get trained on those items? So, it's important that they're courteous, reliable, and most importantly, knowledgeable about the service, treating the customer with respect, understanding disabilities and passenger assistance needs. I always talk about uh, when we do driver training is, would you want this driver transporting your mother or your grandma around or your grandpa? And if the answer is no, then you need to go back to the drawing board and get this driver trained properly, or maybe they don't belong in this business. But it's understanding disabilities, how they offer passenger assistance. We got a lot of customers that are in, they're in this world that, hey, I don't want you to touch me. I don't want passenger assistance, but yet they're frail. They think they can do things on their own. Um, but if the driver turns his back and decides, well, I'm going to have a cigarette outside while they're getting on the bus or the van, then that's a problem that can occur. So we got to have them understand the disabilities that they're facing, passenger assistance needs, and how to provide it are critical through having programs, policies, and procedures in place. Providing a valuable service to the community with professional driver training should be your kind of your bottom line here to this thing. You are providing a service to the community you work in, and we want to develop the professional driver training. Presenting vehicles and drivers that are in uniform, have ID, the vehicles are nice and clean. That's kind of the first step is good brand recognition to start with. Well, establishing these programs, policies, and procedures, the norms, is it easy? Well, I can tell you it's not an easy task. You'll need to seek out and implement the most efficient and safest programs, policies, and procedures, or the norms that will help you build a solid operating foundation. Um, Involve employees from all areas to be included in the process. So, for example, uh, if I want all my mechanics to wear safety goggles, maybe I need to have a shop guy or mechanic involved in the process to understand, where would I put the safety goggles that they can wear that I supply? What kind should they have when they're in the shop, and so on. They'll help you establish those norms, and then what you could do is provide a written document around it. Uh, don't, you if you do not establish a solid operating foundation, mistakes will be made by your employees. Mistakes are critical. We'll see that in a second. But I want to say with this slide, don't wait to have an accident or incident to establish a program, a policy, procedure. Oh, geez, we should have had a written policy for DVI. The driver went out, didn't check his windshield wipers, and now he was late because he had to pull over and stop because it was raining so hard. People missed their rides, and now we've got an ADA complaint against us. Well, I guess we better have a policy now on doing a DVI check, daily vehicle inspection. That's not the time to do it. The time to do it is way before that ever occurs. So mistakes do happen though, and let's talk about that for a minute. Establishing programs, policy, procedures, the norms. Is it easy? No. And mistakes are costly. If you look down this list of 10 things that I've got on here, how do you correct these mistakes? And if you've been around the business long enough, you'll know that these kinds of things happen. For example, accidents and injury and passenger injuries or fatalities occur through accidents that happen. So how do we stop maybe some of this stuff? For example, if you look at your accident listing and you've got some rear end collisions, how do we stop them? Well, failure to keep a 4 second following distance would be a good way to start your policy to say our program is following distance. Our policy is you'll keep a 4 second following distance from the vehicle in front of you. And then the procedure is, well, how do I do that? How do I count 4 seconds? And we teach the drivers to use a stationary point on the road. When the vehicle in front of them passes it, we start counting 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. If they get to that same stationary point, then they're too close. So they got to back off a little bit. And they got to keep reestablishing their following distance when they're in traffic and in situations that may not allow them to have a 4 second. How do they understand that? What is it? But the more important reason is you use this technique to prevent accidents and passenger injuries and fatalities. We got to give them a reason why, and that's done through the program, the policies, and procedures. The same thing about employee injuries. You know, employees, if you're in the snow belt areas of the country, people slip and fall on snow and ice. Well, what is the program or policy procedure for that? When it's snow and ice, do I have a policy that says we got to salt the sidewalk, remove the snow, remove the ice? Do I need to get a snow plow into the facility, and so on and so forth? Complaints about service and reliability. Do we have a resolution process in place that'll address complaints and get back to the people who are complaining? What is our policy of that? Poor training, poor job performance, and on. So the last one on there, employee termination increased the cost of operations. So by having programs, policies, and procedures, or the norms, what we do is give the employee what is their expected behavior in any one of these areas. And if they follow the behavior and we reduce mistakes, what we can do is reduce employee termination or turnover, because we don't have to let people go, or they don't get frustrated and quit because they say, oh, this is a lousy place to work. By having these things in place, you can avoid some of these mistakes that are costly. Okay. Training employees on the policies and norms, programs, policy, procedures, and the norms. First bullet point there is training. It's not just a requirement, it's a condition of employment. Training must be comprehensive, systematic, engages, and changes behavior. The key word is changes behavior. Okay. Training must cover programs, policies, procedure, the norms. So in other words, my example that I just gave about a following distance, the training program must cover that. How do I practice it? Not only do I give people that process in the classroom, but now I do it in behind the wheel training. Must address retraining issues when necessary. Okay, driver makes a mistake, you find it on your drive cam or your lytics, or you see them, you observe them, you bring them in and say, hey, Frank, we're going to put you through some retraining. But it's not just retraining on, a pie in the sky topic. What we do with retraining is focus on the program, the policy, procedure that was the problem. So if they backed their vehicle up wrong and backed into a post, then we got to talk about what is backing. What's your policy on backing? How do we do it? Training the trainer must be evaluated yearly. So in other words, when was the last time your trainer was evaluated for doing the right things? And do they understand what the program policy procedure is, for example, with backing or following distance? So they can make sure that it is relatable to the driver, and the trainer can go out and talk to the program. Program policies and procedure, sorry. Programs, policies, and procedures, the norms must be reviewed and updated annually. So once you get these things in place, it's important to review them. And you know, it's a hard job to review every one of them. That's why I recommend that you have people from every part of your operation involved in this so it can be reviewed. Maybe you make no changes and the policy is fine, you leave it alone, but you should maybe date the front page of your policies and procedures with the review date that says it was done annually. Okay. Some of you work in the transit world where the PTAS, Public Transit Agency Safety Plan, is in place. The transit agencies, a requirement of the PTAS is to review that annually. If you're working in the transit agency world, they will ask you if you have one. A little bit more on training employees is think about who else in your organization. We've talked about this a minute ago that will need to be trained and understand the program's policy procedures or the norms. Think about dispatchers, cadet trainers, maintenance employees, staff, trainers, HR, etc. So in other words, if someone calls into dispatch and says, do I need to pull into the Walmart parking lot to pick up one of my passengers? Where do I go? And maybe there's some specific training that you have to give your drivers about where to go to make that pickup. That's important. If you got cadet trainers who take drivers out after they're trained and have them interact with passengers, what are the policies that they have to follow and make sure that they know? So it's real important that you think about who needs to know about programs, policies, and procedures, or the norms, expected behaviors in your organization. Okay. So in conclusion, the establishment of programs, policies, and procedures, the norms, is not an easy task, and you should involve employees from all areas of your operation. Okay. Remember that 99% of all accidents and incidents are caused by conscious and deliberate unsafe behaviors that violate the norms of an operation. Everything that occurs daily in daily operations can be controlled by your drivers and staff. Ensuring that they perform as directed and expected is the goal that can be reached through the establishment of implementation of the program's policies and procedures or the norms. If you're new and you're just starting your operation and you're just starting to put things together, this is the perfect time to understand what do you want to have for programs, policies, and procedures. How are you going to organize your company? If you have an established company and you're working out there, maybe it's time to have a review and make sure you're covering all your bases and how you operate, and especially what is your expected behavior of your employees. So just a little bit about me. Synergize Consulting was founded in September of 2018, specializing in developing strong safety cultures, which begin with strong foundational training programs. We help companies, agencies, and achieve service excellence in passenger safety and customer service. We do a lot of work with companies to develop their programs, policies, and procedures. We develop strong safety training practices and build a safety culture throughout the organization, utilizing the programs, policies, and procedures called the norms of operations. So, Eric, back to you.
All righty, Frank, thank you so much for a comprehensive presentation. So everyone, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of this Zoom. So just put your questions in there for Frank, and we can get through them one by one. And while we're waiting for people to put in their questions, Frank, I'd like to ask you, what are the sort of most common pitfalls you see people get into when it comes to programs, policies, and procedures? What are sort of the low-hanging fruit that you often advise people to take advantage of?
One of the first, usually one of the first things is, do they have their programs written? Because a lot of times somebody will have it all up here in their head, what they should be doing. But if they don't have it written, it doesn't really have the same strength that a written policy will have that we want to teach our employees. Therefore, the employee doesn't have the expertise that we expect them to have in a whatever area or the context that you're trying to get to them.
Gotcha. All right. Again, I see a lot of participants here. Q&A box is right down there. If anyone wants to throw anything in there, happy to ask Frank any questions. And while we're waiting for that, I will also mention that this recording is going to be sent out afterward by the TTA to everyone who's signed up. And it's going to be released on the NEMT Experts Podcast on Bambi's YouTube channel next Wednesday morning. Frank, it looks like your presentation knocked out any questions that anyone would have had.
Okay, well, that's good.
With that, I'm just going to thank the TTA again for putting this on, and thank you, Frank, so much for sharing your knowledge and your insights.
All right, great. Nice talking with everybody. Good luck. Any questions, please reach out.